Hi everyone, welcome back for chapter 32. Cheers filled the ocean as Jack was carried somewhere. It would have been nice to see where he was going, but not being able to turn his head or even move at all made things a bit difficult. Still, hearing the chants of "kill the human" didn't help set the mood. All he could see as he was carried was the ocean floor, broken every so often by something squishing down over his eyes, something that looked like fruit, maybe. It might have felt like fruit too, but he couldn't really speak to it either way, considering he couldn't feel anything. His merman guards didn't seem to mind the fruit or whatever was being thrown at him, and they'd occasionally stop to apparently give the assembled mob a better shot. Overall, Jack actually did come to appreciate Mako's gesture. It would have been a lot worse if he could have felt it. The mermen carried him up some carved stone steps in the ground, around and around in a spiral, each circle smaller than the last, until they reached the top of some sort of discolored rock platform, high enough for the crowds to see them. They twisted Jack over onto his back, and for a brief moment he saw how many mer people had come to see him get killed. Stretched out in every direction, thousands of civilian mer people screamed and yelled for his blood. Really? That many people wanted him dead? That many people he had never met, never done anything to? For a brief moment, he forgot all about his paralysis and just yelled at the stupidity of the whole thing, with all his might, going off on the bloodthirsty mer people for a good minute before remembering that his mouth wasn't moving and he was just moaning out what really seemed some pretty harsh insults. "By the order of the king of the world," the merman just beyond Jack's visions began slowly saying, as if he were reading it, "this child human has been accused of gross treason against the merfolk and their realm. The human has been found guilty and will therefore receive the maximum penalty, death." A cheer rose from the mob, and Jack went off on them again silently. Stupid paralysis. "Bring in the shark," a merman yelled, and Jack's blood froze. Shark? Beyond him, he heard 2 or 3 mermen yelling back and forth and a lot of thrashing in the water. The sounds of metal chains clanking and straining overpowering the yells every so often. The sounds grew closer and closer, then everything seemed to pause. For a brief moment, Jack desperately wished he could move just to see what was happening, while a smaller, smarter part of himself realized that he was far better off not knowing. "Open its mouth," the merman shouted, closest to Jack. Open its mouth? Jack's eyes widened wide at the idea of... Wait, his eyes moved. He glanced around frantically, but couldn't see much more than he had been able to see before, thanks to his head still being paralyzed. Still, Mako's sting seemed to be wearing off, if slowly, which could be very, very bad. There was really no worse point in the process for him to start feeling something, not with the shark's mouth opening behind him. Above him, the moonlight wavered as something passed over the ocean surface. Jack shot his gaze upward, but he couldn't make out what it was. It sounded as if the crazed mobs didn't have any more luck, as more people began muttering and crying out themselves. Like they had anything to be complaining about right now. "I said, get its mouth open," the merman yelled, and the chains clanked as the shark apparently thrashed angrily. "There," someone yelled, and abruptly everything got darker as row upon row of teeth filled Jack's vision. His head had just been placed in the shark's open mouth, a mouth barely held open by some massive but straining rusty iron chains. "Release the chains on my mark," the merman said, the sound muffled by the shark's mouth. Jack wouldn't have thought that odors could really travel underwater, but the smell in the shark's mouth definitely did, reminding him vividly of the giant who'd tried to eat him. Not the most pleasant of memories to pop in here at the end. The cries of the crowd intensified, but Jack couldn't make out what they were yelling anymore. The merman on his side began counting down from 10, the shark struggling against the chains with every count. Somewhere, Jack thought he heard the sound of metal striking metal. Was that the chains? 3, yelled the merman, and the teeth inched closer to Jack's neck. Involuntarily, Jack flinched, nothing moving. Wait, a finger twitched. Now 2 fingers. Oh, please, not now. 2, the merman yelled. Feeling returned to Jack's arm, but he couldn't move it. Something was tying him down. 1, the merman yelled, and Jack flinched, squeezing his eyes shut desperately as the chains released. And then the sounds of the crowd came crashing over him like a wave, lights shining through his eyelids. Jack hesitantly opened one eye to find a man with a black coat, a blue beard, and an upside-down glass jug over his head, attached by suspenders to his belt, smiling down at him with an enormous grin. "Captain Bluebeard arrives just in the knickers of time once again," Bluebeard roared, and then drove a curved sword down into the ropes, tying Jack down. Freed, Jack used his barely moving arms to roll off the platform, then threw a look behind him. There, 3 pirates wearing dirty clothes and glass jugs held the chains of the shark, pulling desperately against the struggling beast of a fish. Jack looked at the shark, easily 20 feet long, right in the eyes, and the shark stared at him right back. "I would have been so tasty too," Jack told the creature, and then laughed in its face. Bluebeard held out a hand to help him up, so Jack took it, wobbling wildly as if his legs weren't quite done being paralyzed. "Not the steadiest boy, are ye?" the pirate asked. "I was stung by one of the mermen," Jack mumbled as best as he could, glancing around to try and figure out what was happening, which apparently was nearly impossible considering how crazy things were. Everywhere he looked, pirates with glass jars or jugs on their heads fought against mermen, sword to trident. And yet, that wasn't the oddest thing. Was that the entire full-size pirate ship enclosed in a bottle? "Ain't she beautiful?" Bluebeard declared, following Jack's gaze. "Is your boat in a bottle?" Jack said, his head rapidly not wrapping around the concept. "What?" "The rightful name be ship, if ye be valyin' your hide," Bluebeard corrected. "Don't be callin' me baby, no boat, if ye please, you land-livin' lubberbluss. Not when we be goodly enough to rescue you." "Rescue?" Jack asked, glancing around in a pitifully small amount of pirates fighting the incredibly large amount of mermen. "We might be in a little trouble if that's all you got." "Don't worry about it, boy," Bluebeard said. "My boys have 'em." One of the biggest mermen, this was wearing a black shark's head hood, pushed himself off the ground. "You!" the merman yelled, swimming toward Bluebeard. As he swam, he absently grabbed 2 of the pirates' jugs and smashed them together, breaking them and releasing the scruffy-looking men's air supply. While those 2 frantically swam back toward the ship's bottle, the shark-head merman headed straight for Bluebeard. "See if you can take me by surprise again." "All righty," Bluebeard roared, and then winked at the men holding the shark back. They immediately dropped their chains, releasing the shark straight at the enormous merman, who suddenly seemed a bit less intimidating. The merman pushed both fists together and then swung them around straight into the shark's eye. The shark thrashed in pain and then changed direction and swam away for easier prey. "Maybe worry a bit," Bluebeard admitted with a grimace. "That's a big fish, man, isn't it?" And then the merman pulled out a glowing sword. "Now where did that fish get you your sword?" Bluebeard roared, bringing his own sword up, leaping down off the slope of the platform, pulling Jack along behind him. "He probably took it when they decided to have me eaten," Jack said, watching the sword's light run in trails as the merman whipped it around much too fast for the pirates to keep up with. "Well, holding on to your sword will be a topic for later then. You can count on that," Bluebeard said with a wide smile. "Still, since it be yours and all, why don't you go grab it?" With that, the pirate hurled the still recovering Jack right at the merman. Fortunately, the water's flotation magic slowed Jack down, so he landed on the ground just short of the merman, who unfortunately watched him land with a much too satisfied look on his face. "One way or another, you will die, human," the merman roared, and then leapt forward. As Jack's sword came down, he focused inwardly, trying to slow time down, but his head was too fuzzy. He couldn't concentrate, and the sword kept coming, only to abruptly stop as Bluebeard neatly skewered the merman with the pirate's curved sword. The merman's eyes went wide beneath the shark hood, but he kept falling forward, straight at Jack. Moving as quickly as possible, Jack could barely get his legs working enough to roll out from under the merman, stopping just inches out of range. Finally, having a moment to breathe, Jack dropped his hands on either side and let out an enormous sigh, just as his sword dropped from the merman's limp hands into his own. Well, that was convenient. Bluebeard again offered his hand, the wide grin still in place. "See," he said, a dangerous look in his eye. "Nothing to worry about." "Cap'n," said Skinny as he came hobbling up to Jack and Bluebeard. "Cap'n, we need to be on the move. The fish armies, Cap'n. Look out, they've been preparing to march this way." "Hear that, boy?" Bluebeard roared. "There's no time for ye lollygagging, not unless ye want an army of fish at your feet." Jack said. Bluebeard shook his head sadly, then grabbed Jack by his shirt, dragging him as he raced back toward the boat. Landlubbers, always stupiding up the place. And I'll see you guys next time for chapter 33.